Caitlin Clark kept her composure, but her body language said everything. Facing Scott Agnes, she didn't crack a smile. No eye contact. Her responses were flat, controlled, brief. Moments earlier, she had lit up in conversations with other reporters, laughing, gesturing, engaging. The contrast was jarring, and it didn't take long for observers to connect the dots.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
Agnes had previously written pointed critiques of her team and fan base, including sensitive injury details. Now, standing face-to-face with the subject of those reports, the fallout was written all over Caitlin's posture. That contrast, how she treated Agnes versus everyone else, didn't go unnoticed. And it wasn't just a personal grudge. It spotlighted the ripple effects of how journalists choose their words and how athletes remember them. Her refusal to mask her feelings wasn't unprofessional. It was human. Athletes like Caitlin walk a tightrope between media obligations and personal boundaries. This interaction made one thing clear. Those boundaries matter, and ignoring them comes at a cost. Caitlin Clark showed up to a relaxed Pro-Am golf event. Low stakes, sunny, media-friendly. One of those appearances where athletes smile, make a few polite comments, and keep things light. And for a while, that's exactly what she did. She was responsive, warm, even friendly toward most of the reporters lining up to speak with her. Then came Scott Agnes. Everything changed. The energy shifted the second he spoke. Her face tightened. Her posture closed off. Her gaze dropped. She barely acknowledged him. No smiles, no warmth, no casual banter. Just short, clipped answers and clear discomfort. And everyone watching could tell something wasn't right. This wasn't just a tired athlete phoning it in. Caitlin Clark's entire demeanor shifted only when interacting with Agnes. And that contrast didn't just raise eyebrows. It exploded into a viral moment dissected frame by frame across social media. So what happened? Why did one reporter get the coldest response of the day? Scott Agnes has a history. He previously reported on Caitlin's team in a way that rubbed her, and clearly others, the wrong way. He stirred controversy with critical comments about her fan base. He crossed into sensitive territory by sharing information about a team injury that had been kept private. And in sports, especially women's sports, those kinds of missteps are not taken lightly. You can criticize performance. You can analyze strategy. But when a journalist starts stepping over personal boundaries, like exposing injuries or targeting fans, it's a whole different story. It's not just doing your job. It's damaging trust. And Caitlin remembered. She didn't need to call it out directly. She didn't need to respond with attitude or drama. She let her body language do all the talking. Minimal engagement. No eye contact. Deliberate withdrawal. Not rude. Not unprofessional, but unmistakably distant. Every subtle cue sent a message. I don't trust you, and I'm not here to entertain your questions. And that message landed. Clips of the interaction spread online like wildfire. Side-by-side comparisons showed her demeanor with other reporters. Engaged, relaxed, conversational. Then cut to her disengaged stance with Agnes. The difference was undeniable, and people noticed. They started asking, why was she like that with him? What did he do? That's when all the context came flooding back. His coverage, the sensitive reporting, the fan base comments. And just like that, this wasn't about one awkward moment at a golf event. It became a full-on discussion about media boundaries, athlete dignity, and professional respect. Athletes are expected to show up and smile no matter what. They're supposed to take the criticism, accept the spin, and stay polite, even if the reporter asking questions has crossed them in the past. But Caitlin's response challenged that expectation. She didn't fake a smile for someone who had disrespected her. She didn't perform diplomacy for the sake of optics. She held the line. And that line? It was sharp. Still, she didn't overstep. Her response was controlled. She didn't attack Agnes. She didn't even refuse to answer his questions. She just gave him what he'd earned, nothing more than the minimum. That kind of restraint hit harder than any outburst. This interaction peeled back the curtain on the athlete-media relationship. It exposed the emotional labor expected from athletes, especially women, in public-facing roles. And it reminded people that athletes are human. They remember how they're treated. They respond to it. And sometimes that response isn't dramatic. It's quiet, icy, subtle, but effective. The fact that this moment went viral as to how deeply people related to it. Viewers saw in Caitlyn what they felt themselves, having to interact with someone who's hurt them, while being expected to stay composed. She did just that, but she didn't pretend it didn't matter. Her discomfort was visible, and that made the message resonate even more. Now, Scott Agnes probably didn't expect that level of backlash, but it came fast, and it was fierce. Not long after the footage spread, reports confirmed that he was let go, fired. Officially, no one connected the dots on paper, but in the public eye, the connection was obvious. The moment embarrassed him. It drew attention to his past reporting. It exposed the damage caused by his choices. And in journalism, credibility is everything. Once you lose it, especially with the subject of your reporting, your career can start slipping fast. Athlete trust isn't just a nice bonus in sports media. It's essential. When a reporter loses that trust and the public sees it play out in real time, it's a professional disaster. That's the real story here. Not that Caitlyn Clark was cold or dismissive, but that she responded in a way that was completely justified. And now, the reporter's job is gone. Not because she demanded it, not because she called for it, but because the internet saw the interaction, saw her discomfort, and saw through the professionalism to the deeper issue. And let's be honest, she didn't owe him anything more. There's this double standard in sports where athletes are held to the highest bar of grace, even when reporters cross ethical lines. But reporters aren't held accountable in the same way. They get to frame the narrative, poke at personal details, take swipes at fans, and when athletes respond with boundaries, suddenly they're the problem? That logic didn't fly this time. Because the audience could see the truth in Caitlyn's face, in her posture, in the way she answered. She wasn't playing games. She was protecting herself. And the response was overwhelming support. People weren't just watching the clip. They were cheering her on for saying, without words, that respect is a two-way street. That being a public figure doesn't mean you have to swallow every slight. That you can be professional and set boundaries. This whole incident also forces a larger conversation in sports journalism. If access is a privilege, not a right, how do reporters earn and keep that access? How should they be held accountable when their coverage crosses into harmful territory? Because when athletes start withdrawing, when they go quiet on certain reporters, when clips like this one go viral, it's a red flag. And if journalists don't respond with reflection and change, they'll lose more than just sound bites. They'll lose access, trust, relevance. Caitlyn Clark's moment wasn't about drama. It was about dignity. It was a reminder that athletes are allowed to have boundaries, allowed to remember who's treated them well and who hasn't. And they're allowed to express that, even if it makes someone uncomfortable, especially if it makes someone uncomfortable. So what now? This won't be the last time we see a moment like this. As athletes gain more control over their brands, their voices, and their public personas, these kinds of interactions are going to happen more often. And when they do, they'll continue to reshape what professionalism really means in sports. Because professionalism doesn't mean pretending. It doesn't mean tolerating disrespect with a smile. Sometimes it looks like a clipped answer and a cold stare. And sometimes that's all it takes to shift the narrative. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Caitlyn right to respond the way she did? Did Scott Agnes cross a line with his previous coverage? And should athletes push back more often when the media goes too far? Tap the like button if you're here for the real story behind the headlines, and subscribe so you don't miss the next PR disaster, viral meltdown, or press room power move. Because in this game, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. What Caitlyn Clark did, without yelling, without storming off, without even raising her voice, sparked 1,000 conversations about how athletes can and should control the narratives around them. Not through chaos, not through scandal, but through clarity. Her body said everything her words didn't. And that's exactly why this moment stuck. You could see it the moment she recognized the Scott Agnes in the sea of microphones, The way her gaze dropped slightly, how her shoulders pulled in just a bit. She gave him eye contact only once, briefly. Everything else, her tone, her timing, her posture, communicated it wasn't business as usual. Not for him. It was a subtle shift, but it was loud. And it didn't just speak volumes to him. It echoed across social media like a mic drop. People didn't just see an athlete shutting down a question. They saw a professional, composed woman enforcing a line, a clear limit, with surgical precision. And that made everyone ask, how many times has a reporter burned an athlete and expected them to forget? Because that's what this really came down to, memory. Caitlin didn't forget the injuries Scott Agnes talked about when they weren't supposed to be public. She didn't forget how he framed her fan base. She didn't forget how he positioned her and her team, not with fair critique, but with commentary that lingered just long enough to paint her in a certain light. A colder one, a harsher one. Athletes know the difference between accountability and antagonism. And Scott? He crossed that line a while ago. So when he showed up at an event, mic in hand, trying to participate in the warm, cooperative media dance, Caitlin took a step back. No drama, no clap back, just distance. Now, that would have been the end of it, right? Except it wasn't. Because when you're Caitlin Clark, one of the most visible athletes in the WNBA and arguably the league's biggest star, everything gets watched. And this time, it wasn't what she said that got everyone's attention. It was what she withheld. That subtle resistance, that chill in the room when Agnes asked his question. It became a case study in professional resistance. The kind that doesn't break the rules, but makes it very clear that the relationship has been changed. Permanently. And here's the thing. People don't react like this over a one-off misunderstanding. This wasn't some rookie reporter asking a clumsy question. This was the result of built-up tension, of multiple past interactions that left a mark. Scott Agnes had been covering Caitlin's team for a while. And it's not like he just filed neutral box scores. He delved into storylines that blurred the line between critique and personal territory. Injury details that the team clearly hadn't made public. He reported them anyway. Fan-based commentary that felt more like judgment than analysis. He went there too. That's not journalism. It's bait. And Caitlin Clark didn't bite. Instead, she waited. She waited for the moment where she could show just how much control she still had. Not by calling him out, but by doing the one thing reporters fear the most, pulling back. And let's talk about that fallout. The clip of the interaction went viral almost instantly. People across platforms started analyzing her body language like they were decoding a political summit. Some praised her, saying she handled the moment with grace and strength. Others questioned whether she should have played nice anyway. But the majority? They understood exactly what she was doing. She was being professional, but not performative. And that distinction? That's where the real impact came from. She didn't humiliate him. She didn't even dismiss his question. She just didn't give him the warmth, the access, the engagement that other reporters got. And that made people realize access isn't owed, it's earned. When Scott Agnes lost that access, he lost more than a one-on-one connection. He lost credibility with the public, with viewers, with readers who could suddenly see why Caitlin had been distant. And that's when the real professional blow came down. Shortly after the footage went viral, Scott Agnes was fired. No grand announcement, no public explanation tying it directly to the Caitlin incident. But let's be honest, people saw the writing on the wall. The incident exposed a reporter who had lost the trust of his subject, who had turned coverage into conflict. And when the subject is Caitlin Clark, that kind of fallout is unavoidable. Because in sports journalism, if you can't maintain the delicate balance of fairness and respect, your access crumbles, and your job can go with it. And here's what made this moment so different from the usual athlete-journalist tension. Caitlin didn't break. She didn't spiral. She didn't retaliate. She just removed. She disengaged. Calmly, clearly, publicly. That was enough. And in doing so, she flipped the power dynamic. Because here's the uncomfortable truth a lot of journalists don't want to admit. Athletes don't need you as much as they used to. Social media, direct platforms, personal branding. Athletes can control their narratives now. And when a reporter becomes a liability to that control, they get shut out. Fast. That's what happened to Scott Agnes. And Caitlin Clark didn't have to campaign for it. All she had to do was let the clip speak for itself. And it spoke. It asked the question every reporter should be thinking about now. If I lost the trust of my subject, why would I expect the spotlight to stay mine? This moment didn't just change the temperature between one athlete and one reporter. It shifted the weather system for everyone. Reporters are now being forced to examine not just what they report, but how they do it. Are they serving the audience with truth and context? Or are they alienating the very people they rely on for stories? Because if athletes like Caitlin Clark start closing the door and doing it this effectively, more doors will close. Interviews will get tighter. PR teams will start protecting talent more aggressively. And the era of report first, explain later might be on its way out. And let's be real, there's something deeply satisfying about watching someone draw a boundary without ever raising their voice. Caitlin didn't need a viral rant. She didn't need to tweet a thread. She didn't need to leak anything to the press. She just existed calm, clear, and done with one reporter. And it rewrote the rules. The media still has a job to do, but so do athletes. And part of that job is protecting their energy, their privacy, and their dignity. And when one of them says, through action, you don't get my trust anymore, it doesn't have to be explosive to be effective. It just has to be honest. And Caitlin's honesty? It echoed louder than anything Scott Agnes could have written. That silence? It was louder than a headline. Because Caitlin Clark didn't just show restraint, she showed the blueprint. How to hold someone accountable without saying a word. How to control the tone of an entire conversation by simply not participating in the way they expect. And when that clip hit the timeline, it became more than just a tense exchange. It became a symbol, a moment where the silent boundary of professionalism was tested, held firm, and redefined. You can't look at that interaction and pretend it was anything but deliberate. Caitlin knew exactly what she was doing. Every slight hesitation before answering Scott Agnes. Every glance avoided. The tone that never lifted. The smile that never appeared. The wall was up, and it wasn't subtle. It was her version of saying, I've moved on from you, but I haven't forgotten you. That kind of control takes composure. Especially when you're in the spotlight, when cameras are on you, and when you know whatever you do next will be dissected by the public, sports media, and fans alike. And she still chose not to fake it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth behind all of this. Athletes have always been expected to keep it together, even when the media crosses the line. They're told to be gracious, diplomatic, and tolerant, even when journalists blur the ethical lines for clicks or coverage. Especially in women's sports, where media access is still growing and public exposure is constantly at risk of shrinking, there's this pressure to play nice with every reporter, even if the relationship has become toxic. But Caitlin didn't play that game. She drew a line calmly and precisely. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that athletes aren't props. They're not there to make reporters comfortable. They're not obligated to respond to every question with the same tone, the same energy, or the same access. And let's be clear, this wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't an outburst. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was a boundary enforced with poise. And while Scott Agnes might not have expected it, that moment became a spotlight, just not the kind he wanted. Because when viewers saw the difference in how Caitlin responded to him versus other reporters, it raised the question, what did he do to earn that treatment? Then came the receipts. The old articles resurfaced. The injury leaks. The jabs at her fan base. The tone that veered from critique to condescension. And slowly, the narrative clicked into place. Caitlin wasn't being dramatic. She was being accurate. She didn't shut him down over a single article. She didn't freeze him out because of one uncomfortable question. This was a pattern, a build-up, a point of no return. And once the public connected the dots, Scott Agnes' credibility didn't just dip, it dropped off a cliff. That's the part of the story that doesn't get talked about enough. What happens when the power dynamic flips? Because for years, the media has held most of the power in these relationships. They decide the framing. They choose which sound bites to push, which stories to spin. But now, athletes are pushing back. They're using their own platforms, their own silence, their own image control to say, you don't get to have the last word anymore. And Scott Agnes? He became the first high-profile casualty of that shift. Because when your subject stops trusting you, your platform starts collapsing. And once that moment between Caitlin and Scott was seen by millions, the damage couldn't be undone. He was fired. Maybe there were other factors at play, sure. But the timing couldn't have been more clear. The clip went viral, the conversation exploded, and suddenly the byline that used to be trusted was gone. No big announcement, no dramatic farewell, just one very public example of what happens when you burn a bridge and the person on the other side doesn't rebuild it. And Caitlin? She didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She didn't post a vague tweet or throw shade. She just stayed quiet, continued about her business. Let the moment speak for itself. Because the real power move wasn't the silence in that interview. It was her refusal to chase vindication afterward. She knew people would see it. She trusted that her professionalism would be recognized. And she was right. The support online was overwhelming. Fans, fellow athletes, even media professionals acknowledged it. She handled it with grace. She did exactly what you're supposed to do when someone crosses a line. You stop giving them access. That's not petty. That's not cold. That's smart. And what's fascinating is how that one moment might reshape how athletes approach the press moving forward. Because this wasn't just about Caitlin and Scott. This was about every athlete who's been misrepresented, every team whose privacy was ignored, and every player who's been pressured to act like everything's fine when it isn't. Caitlin just happened to be the one who didn't flinch on camera. Now, other athletes are watching. Other reporters are watching. PR teams are taking notes. Because this moment, it's going to be referenced again and again. When the next journalist crosses a line, when another player goes quiet during a media scrum, when someone decides not to answer a familiar voice in the room. The shift has already started. Athletes are reclaiming their power, not by yelling, not by refusing interviews across the board, but by being selective, strategic, honest, because access isn't automatic anymore. It's earned, and once it's lost, it's not easily recovered. So what does that leave Scott Agnes? Probably somewhere reflecting on how fast things can change when the people you cover stop playing along. And Caitlin? She's already moved on. Because this wasn't about him. It was about her. Protecting her space. Defending her peace. Drawing the line. With complete professionalism and zero apology. Let us know what you think. Was Caitlin's response fair? Should more athletes follow her lead and use body language as a boundary? Or should the media be held to a higher standard before they even get a question in? Drop a comment with your take. Like if you've ever wanted to pull a Caitlin Clark and just go cold. And subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Because in the world of sports, celebrity, and media chaos, the silence always says more than you think.